we've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Breakdown on this Wednesday of Penn State week. We got a lot to talk about this week as the Buckeyes get ready for Penn State in what many people think is their biggest game to date. Whether or not you thought this is a bigger game than Oregon by this point in the year, I suppose is your prerogative. But you could certainly argue that they were both big games. I think the Penn State game has a little bit more meaning because it's got a much bigger impact on Ohio State's Big Ten title chances. And this is a Penn State team that, despite the fact they've lost their last two games, I don't think you can take them lightly, and I am very certain the Buckeyes are not. We heard that time and time again yesterday at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. They're treating this game like it's against the number 4 team in the country, like they saw 2 weeks ago Penn State's ranking, not like the number 20 team in the country after their last two performances. I'm Brendan Gulick along with Brett Hiltbrand. And Brett, I think this is a really interesting week for the Buckeyes because it's my impression that Ohio State is probably on a trajectory that some fans look at and say, gee, this offense right now is unbelievable. And some fans are still in the camp of, you got to prove it against a better defense. I don't think anybody in America is going to say that Penn State's defense isn't good enough to pass the eye test. And if the Buckeyes play this week like they have the last 5 now, excuse me, I think they're going to put a lot of those doubters to rest pretty quickly.
For sure, they'll check every box. I think that a lot of people have been, if you have any reservations, if you go out and you pound Penn State, I think you're checking the box, all the rest of the boxes that you need to. Penn State's such an odd team in kind of a peak and valley sort of way. The team that rose into the top 10 was a different football team in some ways than the one we see now. Sean Clifford hasn't been 100% since he left that Iowa game. I think he'll be close or as close as possible to 100% this weekend against Ohio State. But he definitely wasn't there in my mind. Even in the most recent game against Illinois, I thought he looked a little sore at times, tentative. You could tell that they didn't really feel super comfortable running him as much as maybe they have in the past. But the defense is what, in many ways, should be, kind of the hallmark of this team. And in fact, I think if they have an offense that is, maybe up to the normal Penn State standards, we're talking about a team that's, playing at a higher level than I think they are right now.
I don't think you can ever really discount the fact of a guy like Sean Clifford, who, again, to your point, clearly was not 100% against Illinois. And for anybody that saw some of our podcast content last week, both Tommy Zagorski and I had said we thought it was a bad idea for Clifford to play against Illinois because if Penn State doesn't have him healthy, they don't have a realistic chance of beating the Buckeyes. They
don't have a realistic chance of beating anybody.
Yeah, well, it's true. And I mean, look what happened against Iowa in the second 2/3, I guess the back 2/3 of that game. As soon as he got hurt, that game flipped hard, fast. Yeah. So we had kind of basically said, hey, Illinois is not a great team, and you can probably get by against them without him. And we were surprised to both see him play and then see them lose with him. That was obviously a tough look. But I don't think you can discount having an Ohio kid who has played as much as Sean Clifford has played come back to the state of Ohio and in what will probably be his final go-round to have a chance to, try to pull off the unfathomable and beat the Buckeyes. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the whole Connor Cook thing, from a few years ago with Michigan State. every time you saw Connor Cook play as a Buckeye fan, you held your breath a little bit because Connor Cook was a really, really good quarterback at Michigan State. You know, I don't know if Sean Clifford is going to have what it takes to beat Ohio State. I know he's got some really good weapons. Jahan Dotson is a legitimate wide receiver, probably one of the top 10 receivers in the country. You know, their defensive metrics have been very, very good this year. And they have played against a couple of good teams. You know, when you're 7 games into the year and you're allowing basically 14 points per game, you're doing something right. They've got some experience in their secondary. They've got a good linebacking core. Joey Porter Jr. is outstanding. Their defensive line has caused some problems for some of the maybe the worst offensive lines they've seen this year. They've only got 15 sacks through 7 games. I mean, it's not like they're, you know, creating crazy havoc. I think they've got 44 tackles for loss. But they're tough to throw the football against. Now, that all said, Ohio State hasn't had a problem throwing the football against literally anybody. And I am of the opinion that while it's going to be a tougher week, guys are going to be less open. I still think Ohio State offensively right now is on such a trajectory that I'm not sure anybody in the country other than maybe Georgia with what we've seen so far is going to put something together to stop them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a defense that I think it fits perfectly in kind of like what I said earlier, and the fact that like it peaks and valleys. Like sometimes the defense looks great, and then you see the Illinois, they gave up 357 rushing yards in that game, and not like in like huge chunk plays. Where in many ways, I think if you watch highlights of that game, just of like the of say like the second and third quarters, and you see all these huge runs, or first and second quarters, and you see all these huge runs that Illinois is getting, and you kind of wonder how they barely won the game after an NCAA record 9 overtimes. So yeah, they're an odd defense in some ways. I kind of think, in many ways it matches up perfectly with Ohio State. Scheme wise, where extremely dynamic running the football. If you try and sell out to stop that, well, they're probably better throwing it. So it presents a massive problem for James Franklin and company. And I think for Ohio State, it was, I think it's smart, from Ryan Day's perspective, to prepare for Penn State in the context of this being like a top 10, top 5 team, which they probably aren't. I think in, everything that we've seen over the last, say, 3-4 weeks has probably proved that they aren't. But I think it's smart to try and prepare that you're going to get their best shot, because that's what happens a lot of times when Penn State plays Ohio State. We've seen that over the last 10, 20 years, that Penn State gets up for Ohio State. Unlike many other teams in the Big Ten, I think it's more often than not, it's the biggest game on their schedule every single year. And we've seen some really amazing games between these two teams, especially in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, the Buckeyes have won 8 of the last 9 and 4 in a row. But to your point, 3 of the last 5 games have been decided by a field goal or less, and 2 of them were 1-point games. Right. I mean, literally came right down to the wire. And, I think there's probably this element of, for Penn State, I don't want to say their season's over. It's not over. But, I mean, the realistic chance of them making the playoff is gone with 2 losses. They're out. And so, what's next? Are you playing for a New Year's 6 game? Are you playing for maybe a chance to go to the Rose Bowl? Even at that, I think they need a little bit of help, because, they have a bad loss to Illinois, and there's 3 teams in their own division that are ranked higher than they are. Michigan State this weekend, you could almost call that a Rose Bowl game, because I don't think the winner of that game is beating the Buckeyes. I think Michigan's defense is significantly better. I still don't like what they have at quarterback yet, and I don't think they have figured it out enough, because they keep going back and forth between McNamara and McCarthy. We're both talented, but neither one of them have wowed me, and maybe that's why they keep going back and forth. Maybe they haven't figured out the answer. Michigan State runs the football well. I just don't know if they have the depth to beat the Buckeyes, but they're certainly an improved team. If you're Penn State, looking at what you've got in front of you, I guess if Penn State, does what they need to do the rest of the season and doesn't lose a game, I suppose it's possible that we could still see them make a run to a playoff game, or I'm sorry, to a New Year's Six game. I don't see that as being realistic for them. Not especially after, the way we kind of saw them fall apart this past week. Tommy Zagorski had said this the other day. I don't know if I totally agree. But his whole point was he thought that the culture at Penn State was a little bit questionable in saying things like, when James Franklin's teams lose, their record in the next game is also not very good. And they, it feels like some of the hype around that program is a bit manufactured. It's not a knock on their talent, right? I mean, they certainly have some guys, but Penn State's schedule the rest of the year is, after this game, they've got 2 games they should win, although they should have beaten Illinois. They should beat Maryland. They should beat Rutgers, but they got to play Michigan at home, and they got to finish the year at Michigan State. That's a pretty tough road for a team that already has 2 losses to stay mentally up for. And I'm not convinced that they're necessarily going to do that.
That to me, essentially what you're saying is, in my mind, the cornerstone sentiment for arguing for expanding the college football playoff, right? That, essentially if you get a bad loss, your season is over, because we've devalued the bowl games so much, the quote unquote non-playoff bowl games so much that I don't think they matter in the same way. And I think for players, especially when you consider, NIL money, the windfall of swag that you get from bowl games, traditionally matters a whole heck of a lot less. Right. So, I think that kind of raises, that idea of your season probably shouldn't be over, say the last week of October. But in many ways it might be. And that I think that's unfortunate, right? I don't think that necessarily feels like the spirit of the game. But I think going back to what Tommy said about the, Penn State's record after losses. I covered Penn State for 2 years. I've seen this, that kind of sentiment. I mean, look at what James Franklin did after that Iowa loss. He comes into his media availability, has a speech prepared about faking injuries and stuff. And it's literally I think sometimes you see coaches sometimes mix up the idea of something being an excuse or an explanation. I think it's a fine line between those 2 points, but sometimes I think we maybe see some of those folks conflate the two, and that was just an airing of grievances that James Franklin had.
I don't want to cut you off, but did you see his press conference yesterday?
I try to.
Brett, this is unbelievable. Seriously, if you haven't seen this, it'll blow your mind. I think he was rattled. I mean, it was clearly an accident, but it happened multiple times. He kept referring to Ohio State as Illinois. He kept saying, I'm just focused on Illinois when he was addressing the rumors of the USC and LSU jobs. And then he called Ohio Stadium the Big House. I mean, is he screwing with us? There's no way you can be that, just out of it. I mean, maybe he had a bad moment. I don't know, but not good.
I'd like to. I've spent a lot of my life giving James Franklin the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, I got nothing, man. Yeah, I mean that I think maybe just a bad moment, but in general, I've seen that team do things, especially when it was more talented. Back when I was there in 2015, 2016, 2017, of almost self-immolating a little bit, right? Like just absolutely lighting itself on fire because you played poorly against Pitt, like so it just was kind of funny, or not funny, but like it's odd to see that kind of, kind of repeat itself a little bit. But, I think in a lot of ways, when we were talking about this, like we were looking ahead to this matchup like a month ago, right? Or 3 weeks ago, whatever it was. And, it's like, wow, it's a big game for Ohio State if Penn State holds its, end of the bargain. Well, Penn State didn't, right? Ohio State, Michigan State, big game if Michigan State holds its end of the bargain. Yet to be seen. We'll Ohio State, yep. Michigan, same deal. Big Ten championship, Ohio State, Iowa, going to be a top 10 matchup if Iowa holds up its end of the bargain. Purdue happened, right? So if you're looking at this in the context of how all of these games influence Ohio State's chances of making the college football playoff, you need some of these teams to continue winning, and right now none of them have.
Well, I'm wondering if I totally agree with you, and I have thought a lot of those same thoughts, but I'm wondering if, because Ohio State seems to be playing at a level that is so much higher than the rest of the league, if it's watering down what we think of some of the other programs in the conference.
I've been saying that for 8 years.
Well, sure. Yeah. But especially this year when, Ohio State for the first time since 2014 looks like they're, look, if they win out, I don't see a scenario where the Buckeyes are not in the playoff. That's only one that could give me even the slightest bit of pause is if Alabama beats Georgia in a tight game in the SEC title game. Alabama and Georgia are probably both getting in, assuming they win every other game they play. And if Oklahoma and Cincinnati both go undefeated, I don't think the committee is going to put an undefeated Cincinnati team in front of a one-loss Ohio State team that is pounding teams. I don't think that's going to happen. I guess we'll see on Tuesday when the first college football playoff rankings come out, kind of where the committee thinks Cincinnati is versus some of the other Power 5 teams. I think the Bearcats deserve a chance to play for a national title, but I don't think that they're going to get in a 4-team playoff unless there's total chaos and there's only one-loss team that makes the playoff. I don't think that favors Cincinnati. That's a whole nother podcast. But if you're a Buckeye fan right now, you're looking at the schedule, you're looking at the way they're playing and thinking, okay, Penn State's a big notable game nationally. Michigan State and Michigan are also big notable games on the schedule the rest of the way, and you're going to get a good opponent in the Big Ten championship game. And if you go 6-0 the next 6 Saturdays, you have to think you're getting in the college football playoff. I just don't see a scenario where the Buckeyes are left out. But I don't think that's necessarily fair. Face it. Right now, the coaches poll and the AP poll have been pretty straightforward in saying that the Big Ten East is the best division in football this year. I can't remember the last time, and I'm sure it's happened. I literally don't remember it. But I can't remember the last time that the Big Ten East had that many teams ranked in front of a whole bunch of SEC teams.
Probably 2015 or 2016.
Yeah, I was going to say it's certainly been a few years. So I want to be careful not to water down the rest of the Big Ten simply because Ohio State looks so much better than the rest of the conference now. It sounds like you share that opinion, though.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that in many ways is kind of the, that in many ways, I think is the trajectory that this program has been on over the last, say 5 to 10 years. Right. I just think that's how that is the natural progression of things when you just recruit over the course, recruit at the level at which Ohio State has over the course of the last 10 years compared to, the rest of the league. And, and I think that's one of the reasons why, you kind of saw some of the conference realigning, stuff that happened and you kind of consider all that, you know, what these kind of top tier football programs across the country, the Georgias, the Alabamas, you know, Clemson previously, obviously not this season, but, you know, in certainly in seasons past, how those programs kind of influence, you know, everything else. But I mean, it's, you know, in many ways, it's kind of like the great conundrum of you know, college football, right? Like at the end of the day, you can only play and beat who you know, who's in front of you, regardless of what that competition, the level at which that competition is playing. And it very much depends, not necessarily on the you know, kind of singular argument, do you win, but how do you win? And that's, you know, most important for Ohio State right now, I think, especially.
What does Ohio State have to prove this weekend? I mean, is there something that you think, regardless of what the Buckeyes have done the first 7 games, and in particular the last 5 weeks, or I guess 6 weeks, 5 games, because I think if you are paying any sliver of attention to Ohio State football, the team that you saw play against Indiana, it's almost like it's a different roster. It's the same guys, but way more experience from the young guys on the roster. The scheme's different. The coaching's different. In a couple places on defense, the personnel's different. I mean, look, they haven't given up a rushing touchdown in 5 weeks. They also haven't seen a running back and an offensive line the last 5 weeks like they saw in weeks 1 and 2. But the linebacking play has been so much better. The offense is on such an unbelievable run right now. I'm wondering if there's something the Buckeyes need to prove this weekend, or if it's simply just go out and win, and, you know, whatever people's perceptions are, they are. There is a human element to the college football playoff committee, right? That's why we got away from the computers. So that's why I asked the question, because in some regard, the eye test has to matter with this format.
Yeah, I think if, you know, if we're kind of considering it in that kind of vein, right? Like, you have to go out and pound Penn State, right? Like that is probably, you know, in my mind, you know, I think if you kind of, in my mind, that's what they quote unquote like have to do, because I think that's like kind of the bare minimum for the way the rest of college football looks at Penn State when they kind of dip in and out of Big Ten play, right? Like when people watch Penn State, Iowa, and they look at that game and everyone's like kind of like, you know, watching it through fingers, you know, because it was maybe not the best football game. And then both teams follow up that game with just complete dumpster fires. Like, you know, like it does a lot to taint the original, you know, kind of the original matchup, and how, you know, that was a huge top 10, top 5 game, right? And in many ways, like, just because, you know, you both teams go out and lay complete eggs, you know, in games after that, doesn't necessarily take away from it, but it certainly influences it. And so I think if you're Ohio State, you just have to keep, you know, essentially putting, you know, 50 plus on the board on these teams, and, you know, hot knife through butter your way, you know, into the Big Ten championship and beyond. So, you know, that's like maybe not, you know, super fair, because I don't think the SEC, you know, Georgia is not graded on that metric, right? Alabama has never been graded on that metric. Alabama could beat Auburn 10-7 in the National College Football meet, in like a struggling to be bowl eligible Auburn team, and, you know, by 3 points. And then you know, the next Monday, you know, Paul Feinbaum's on TV talking about how, you know, there are so many NFL guys on that roster, blah blah blah, right? You know, I wrote about this in our you know, our game picks, our previews, that, you know, that essentially Alabama, you know, jumping ahead of undefeated Oklahoma is one of the most massively stupid things that we do in our crazy little world. In that, I truly don't understand the benefit of the doubt that SEC teams get that Oklahoma has never once gotten. But you bet every dollar in my bloody bank account that I have now and I have for the rest of my life, I will bet every single cent that the minute Oklahoma waltzes into the SEC, all of a sudden that benefit of the doubt will show up, and that's totally absurd. So, I don't necessarily love how, essentially the metrics are different, very, very conference to conference, but that's just how it is. And that's how Ohio State's going to be judged.
It is interesting to me to see the conversation around Ohio State and Alabama, obviously both having lost games to good Power 5 programs that maybe haven't had great years. If Oregon would still be undefeated right now, I think we'd hold them in a different light. But when you play in a league that doesn't have high-end college football teams most years, and when you lose to Stanford, you kind of lose the benefit of the doubt there, even if they're still playing reasonably well. And Texas A&M, a decent team, they're not going to make their conference championship game. They've already lost twice. So, a win over Alabama sure is good for Jimbo Fisher and sure is good for Aggie fans. But I just think it's interesting how that one loss perception for Ohio State and for Alabama seems to carry some different water. I agree with your sentiment on that. As far as what the Buckeyes need to prove this weekend, they don't need to prove anything to me. I think I've seen enough in the growth of this team over the last 6 weeks to feel really comfortable with, my projection for them. I've been saying this for 2 weeks, and I will continue to say this. If this team stays healthy and if this team wins every game the rest of the year, I wholeheartedly believe they belong in the college football playoff, and I think they're going to get there. The ESPN playoff predictor, it's actually, I think it's come down 2% from 98 to 96%, that if they win out and win the league title, that they're going to get in. We'll see how it goes. But for this week, this team, certainly yesterday, when we had a chance to visit with a bunch of guys and with Ryan Day, they certainly seem to be laser focused. And I'm excited to see what they can do on Saturday night. They get to play Penn State at home. It's going to be a scarlet out at the stadium. There are still, as we understand, some tickets remaining, but the Buckeyes are expecting 102,000 or more, perhaps a sellout. So if you are going to the game, wear your scarlet. If you're going to watch from home or watch from somewhere other than Ohio Stadium, 7:30 kickoff on Saturday night. We'll wrap this one up a little shorter than usual today. I know Brett's got a couple things to do this morning, so we appreciate the conciseness or the concision of our Buckeye breakdown here on Wednesday morning. We'll talk to you guys again soon. Yeah, exactly.
Streamlining.
Love it. We'll talk to you guys again soon. BuckeyesNow.com for all the latest. You can check out our social media channels. We're live just about every day here on the YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our content. That would really mean a lot to us if you'd consider that. For Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. Ohio State and Penn State coming up this weekend, 7:30 Saturday night, the Buckeyes and the Nittany Lions. We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team all Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.